Okay, hello everybody. I'm really hoping that the sound works, but we'll see how this goes. So, components of blood. Yesterday you guys finished writing a quiz, and when you were done, I had you guys grab textbooks and start filling out a summary sheet on red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Today we're going to go through the details of that. So if there's information that you weren't able to find in the textbook, or if you were struggling with reading through the textbook, take some of the information that we talked about today and then throw that on that summary page when we're done. I'm going to be doing a digital whiteboard thing on my iPad that I will be posting, and you can grab information from there as well. But yeah, we're moving into the next part of this unit. We are still in technically the circulatory system because we're still technically talking about blood. Okay, but now instead of talking about the heart and the vessels and how the blood moves around your body, we are going to look at the parts that actually make up the blood. So that's our plan for today. Tomorrow we will be talking about the different blood groups. So what makes you like blood type A versus blood type O, that sort of thing. And then on Thursday, we're going to be talking about the immune system. So I know it's a lot right before Easter break. We will be starting a project when you guys get back to hopefully help to remember it all and reprocess it all. So don't stress too much. It's just kind of how it worked. Easter's at a weird time this year, so we're just going with it, okay? So if you did not grab your notes yet, they should be on the front lab bench. So make sure you grab a copy of those. And we're gonna just get started. So our plan for today, we're going to look at the different types of blood cells and the role that they play. And we're going to look at what happens when some of these blood cells malfunction. So all the problems like I always like to go through. All right, so the blood itself that you have currently pumping through your arteries, your veins, and your capillaries is made up of just over half fluid. So the fluid is made up of mostly water, but then a bunch of dissolved gases and dissolved nutrients and dissolved ions, and all of that's flowing around our bodies. And then the other 45% is made up of the cells that we're going to be talking about today. 44% of those cells are red blood cells. So the bulk of your blood has red blood cells in it. The other 1% is composed of your white blood cells and your platelets, so your immune cells and your blood clotting cells. So red blood cells obviously have the biggest role to play, and they're going to have the most information that go along with them that we'll be talking about. All of your blood cells, regardless of which type, starts out in your bone marrow. Okay, your bone marrow is the middle part, this kind of spongy part of your bones. And we technically have two different types of bone marrow. We have red bone marrow and we have yellow bone marrow. The red bone marrow is the part that we look at when we're looking at blood cell formation. And we find that in the top part of the femur bone, so your big leg bone, and also in your hip bones. We also have red bone marrow in our skull, so there's some blood cell production there, but the bulk of it's happening in our hip bone and in our femur. The fluid portion of your blood is called plasma. Okay, so in the plasma, you also have things like plasma proteins, which is what we talked about in the last section where we were looking at osmotic pressure, or the fluid moving back up into the capillaries. That had to do with plasma proteins. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. And because the plasma has so much water in it, we do refer to it as a fluid tissue. So that's just something important to remember. And all of the individual blood cells that we're going to be talking about, so red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets, they all work together for a common purpose, which is, again, to keep you alive. Okay. So these plasma proteins that I was talking about, these again have pretty big roles when it comes to maintaining your, life processes. And the proteins are going to work hand in hand with the cells that we're also going to be talking about. Oops. 2 seconds. Here we go. As I said, have a digital whiteboard that I'm going to be drawing on, and I will post a PDF version of this for you guys so you are able to copy this down. But this is the best that I've got for when I'm not standing up in front of you guys and writing stuff on the whiteboard. So the plasma proteins that we have, there are 3 different versions of them, or 3 different types of them. You have plasma proteins called the albumins, the globulins, and the fibrinogens. And yes, they are fun names, and I'm sorry. You do need to know them. Okay, so the albumins are the ones we talked about in the circulatory system. These are the ones that are dealing with your osmotic pressure. So these, again, are helping to bring water back up into the capillaries to make sure that you have enough fluid where you need it. The globulins, I think, and this just helps me to remember it, globulin sounds kind of like goblin. And I like to think of these proteins as the ones that are protecting you from the goblins that try to invade your body. So the globulins are your immune system proteins. And so they are trying to protect you and to keep you safe from the goblins, apparently. My brain thinks it makes sense. And then fibrinogens, we will come back to in a little bit, but these ones help and play a role in blood clotting. So again, there's more than just cells in your blood. There are a lot of other things that do help to make sure that you are staying alive and staying healthy. And the other part of my drawing, this is our plasma proteins. Like I said, we have our femur. I'm not 100% sure where this is going to show up on here. So the top part of the femur has kind of this weird bumpy sort of shape to it. And inside you have bone marrow. Some of you guys might know someone or be someone who enjoys eating bone marrow. It's a pretty common thing for some people to actually eat. If you like eating ribs, you can suck the bone marrow out of the ribs sometimes. If you have certain types of soups or stews that have big leg bones or arm bones in them, you can actually like scoop the bone marrow out and eat it. It's really, really good for you. It weirds me out a little bit, so I personally don't eat bone marrow, but lots of people do, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's high in iron. Oops. And it's really, really good. Apparently, according to some people. So this is the head of the femur, this red stuff in the middle over here. If I can find my mouse. There it is. This part in the middle is the bone marrow, and this is where your blood cells are coming from. And I will get into a little bit more detail in a second. Oops. of the different types of blood cells. Back to this. If you didn't fill this out from the other board thing that I had up, this explains that process as well, about the different types of proteins. So again, 3 main types of plasma proteins. Albumins help with osmotic pressure to maintain that fluid balance in the blood. Globulins provide protection or immunity against invading microbes. And then your fibrinogens, again, are important in blood clotting, and they work alongside with platelets. So proteins are important. But cells, they're a lot more common. There's a lot more of them. And this is where we're going to spend the rest of today. So a erythrocyte is a fancy word for a red blood cell. If you use the word red blood cell, that's totally fine. But if you ask me what a erythrocyte is, I'm not going to tell you. I expect you to understand and remember that erythrocytes and red blood cells are the same thing. One word is just a little bit more sciencey. The average male, if I were to come up to you, take a needle, poke your finger, and take a little drop of blood, and we were to analyze it under the microscope, the average male will have about 5.5 billion red blood cells in that single drop of blood. Females, on the other hand, will have approximately 4.5 billion. The reason that there's a discrepancy in those numbers, one has to do with the fact that females lose blood every month during their menstrual cycle. And the second thing is that on average, again, not always, but on average, females tend to be smaller than males. So the smaller the body size, the less blood cells you need to transport oxygen around your body. It's the same if we were looking at like an adult versus a child. There's going to be a pretty drastic difference in the amount of red blood cells because, again, adults are usually quite a bit larger than children. We can have the environment play a role in the amount of blood cells that we also have. So if you live at a high altitude, so if you're living on top of a mountain, you're going to have more red blood cells than if you live at sea level. And the main reason for that is your oxygen levels. Okay. The higher up you go, the higher the altitude, the less oxygen is available. So your body's going to compensate for that by producing more blood cells so that we can still get the proper oxygenation to our tissues to make sure that we are not, passing out or dying because we don't have enough oxygen. There's actually cases where some athletes who depend on oxygen, so they do a lot of cardio, they will actually train at higher altitudes for specific races or specific events. And then when they actually participate in that race or event at sea level, they are able to have better performance because they have better oxygenation of their tissues. This is technically a form of blood doping. So you're like artificially increasing the amount of blood cells that you have. So there are some stipulations where that could be illegal. So not everybody does it, but a lot of marathon runners use this trick because it helps them to be able to, again, perform better. So amount of red blood cells, there's a lot. Okay, you have like 5 liters of blood approximately, and every milliliter of that 5 liters has billions of blood cells. So you have a number of blood cells that I can't even like come up with because the number is so huge. I will also show you guys the board that I'm drawing on afterwards, okay? One of the most important proteins that we are going to talk about, and it is a protein that's going to continue to come back again and again and again and again, regardless of what system we're going to be looking at, is the protein known as hemoglobin. This is the protein that actually carries the oxygen. So this is the reason why we are alive, basically. The reason I say that is if you didn't have a hemoglobin molecule or the amount of hemoglobin molecules that we have on our red blood cells, you would be able to stay alive for approximately 4.5 seconds. So you'd basically be able to take a breath and then breathe out and then pass away. Okay. Hemoglobin is what allows you to hold your breath and not just pass out. Okay. Hemoglobin is what's keeping you alive. So we're going to get into a little bit of detail about what the hemoglobin molecule is. And again, we're going to keep coming back to it over and over and over again because it impacts every single system for the most part that we talk about. When we talk about how important they are for a single red blood cell, so one red blood cell, single by itself, has approximately 280 million hemoglobin molecules on one. There's going to be some on this side, and there's going to be some on that side. Again, per drop of blood, let's say we'll meet in the middle and say 5 billion red blood cells. So that's 5 billion times 280 million hemoglobin molecules. And then we're going to multiply that by the 5 liters of blood that you have in your system. And again, it's an even bigger number than the amount of blood cells you have in your body. And it hurts my brain because math and my brain struggle, especially at like 8 o'clock at night, which is what it is right now. Okay. So it's super important. It's binding to oxygen. It's transporting that oxygen to your cells and tissues so you can do cellular respiration. You can make your ATP, and it's keeping you alive. It's doing the hard work. So the hemoglobin itself is composed of 2 structures. You have the iron structure or the iron component, and then the globin component, which is the protein component. So heme means iron, and the iron is important because iron is what's actually helping to bind to the oxygen or attract the oxygen to the hemoglobin molecule. So if you have low iron levels, you're not able to pick up as much oxygen, and then we're going to have some issues, which is something that I will talk about. So iron is essential for proper blood cell formation. When oxygen binds to hemoglobin, so when the hemoglobin is ready, its arms are open like a big hug. When the oxygen comes in, it closes and it holds on to that oxygen while it rides its way around your bloodstream on those red blood cells. It gets to your cells and tissues. It's going to open its arms. That oxygen is going to be released and do what it needs to do. But in the moment where hemoglobin is hugging on to that oxygen and keeping it nice and close, it is referred to as oxyhemoglobin, which just means oxygen plus hemoglobin. When the hemoglobin opens its arms and says, all right, oxygen, go forth and conquer, that shape change is again going to cause the reflection of blue light, which is why your veins in your wrists and in your hands have that bluish appearance. Your blood, again, is not blue. It is the reflection of light off of your hemoglobin because it is releasing oxygen. Okay. Red blood cells also have a very fancy shape to them. So there's something we call biconcave. So again, concave, if it's caving, it means it's caving in. Okay, so it's pushing in. And bi means two, so it means that it's caving in on both sides. If you look at my little stuffy here, there's a little divot. Okay, so it's caving in on this side, and then it's also caving in on that side. The reason it's able to do that is because it doesn't have a nucleus. So there's nothing in it that's holding its DNA. Because it doesn't have a nucleus, it technically isn't a cell, even though we call it a cell. And when you're lacking a nucleus, you're said to be enucleated. But having no nucleus, being biconcave is going to increase your surface area. And that increased surface area means we can have more hemoglobin. And if there's more hemoglobin, we can transport more oxygen. So as a design, it's good because it helps to keep us alive better. Your red blood cells, again, since they don't have a nucleus, they can't just divide and make more of themselves. So we get more blood cells from our bone marrow. So the bone marrow is just constantly working, constantly pumping those blood cells into our actual bloodstream. And your blood cells have a limited lifespan, so they don't live forever. They live for about 120 days, which is like 3 to 4 months. Okay, I can't math right now. It's too late for me to figure out what that is. I think it's 4 months, possibly. So once they reach the end of their life cycle, they're going to rupture. Your immune cells are going to help to get rid of them, and the bone marrow is going to replace more of them. And we have specialized white blood cells that we have in our spleen and in our liver that are looking at the age of these red blood cells just to make sure that they're not living too long and that they're also not dying before they're ready to. And they help to remove all of the kind of ruptured bits of our red blood cells so they're not just bumping around our circulatory system to help keep us nice and safe. We can also reuse pieces of the red blood cells. So we're all about recycling in our body and using what we can to make sure that we're not having to make everything from scratch because that requires a lot of energy and we just don't want to do that. So when we break up the red blood cells, we're going to use pieces of those hemoglobin molecules again to create more red blood cells. Anything that we're not able to use will go to our liver and then be processed, and whatever is considered waste, we are going to get rid of either through our digestive system in the form of feces or through our urinary system in the form of urine. And so we have our little spleen here, and this is my warning to you. I have a lot of these ridiculous comics and I love them dearly, so just accept them because they're great. So the spleen is talking to the red blood cell and he's like, "Well done, red blood cell." And the blood cell's like, "Thanks, spleen." He's like, "You lived honorably." "Lived? I'm only 4 months old." Into the garbage, because 4 months again, you're done. So the spleen will come back. And again, I apologize in advance, but I also don't because I think they're great. So as always, what can go wrong? The answer is a lot. So when we're looking at disorders or issues with our red blood cells, we again are going to be focusing on how much hemoglobin there is, because hemoglobin is indicating how healthy these red blood cells actually are. So the first thing that can happen is anemia, and anemia can impact anybody and can impact you at any time. So this is when you have a deficiency in your iron levels, which means that you don't have enough iron, and usually that's linked to your hemoglobin levels being low. And when you have anemia, usually that means that you are tired, okay? You don't have very good circulation, you bruise really, really easily. And it's all because you just don't have enough oxygen being transported to your tissues. And so your body is just tired and it can't do what it needs to do to function at its regular level if there's not enough oxygen. You can get anemia from extensive blood loss. So that can be from trauma. A lot of females will experience anemia at different different points in their monthly cycle. Right after their menstruation portion, your iron levels are typically going to be quite a bit lower because you've just had X amount of time of blood loss. But your body will start to build that iron back up unless you have other issues. So if you do suffer from anemia, it's a relatively easy fix. You can eat more food with iron in it. So you can have more spinach, more red meat. And if it's severe enough, you may have to go on some iron supplements. So you literally just take a pill of iron, and then that usually helps to raise those blood or those iron levels back up. On the opposite side, you can have too much iron in your blood, but luckily this is not something that you can develop unless you have the genetics for it. So anemia is something that can impact anybody. Hemochromatosis is a genetic disorder. So it has to be in your DNA. You have to get it from your parents, where you have too much iron attaching to your red blood cells, usually because you have too much hemoglobin. And if it's not treated, it will start to build up in your heart and in your liver, and those organs will start to fail. We learned that the heart is like kind of super, super important. The liver, we will learn, is also super, super important. So if the liver or the heart starts failing, your body's not in a very great position and isn't feeling very good. Luckily, with these sorts of disorders, the treatment is great. Okay. You might not like needles, but that's honestly the worst part. You can treat hemochromatosis by getting something known as a phlebotomy, which is where they remove about 500 milliliters or half a liter of blood, also known as bloodletting. And if you have good enough blood, so if you pass all of the check boxes, you can technically donate this blood to a blood donation clinic. It's really rich in iron, so they really, really like it. And it helps to get rid of that excess iron. It doesn't build up. You kind of wait for a few months or a few years, depending on how severe your case is, and then you get another phlebotomy when you need it. I have a very high family history of hemochromatosis. My mom has it, my grandpa has it, my aunt has it, and my grandma's dad passed away because of it. So my mom has it on both sides of her family. I was tested for it when I was 16, and I am a carrier for it. So I don't have the disorder, but if my husband is also a carrier for it, there's chances that our kids could have it. So they will have to get tested when they're older, just to make sure that they can get the blood work done if they need it, and hopefully not deal with iron levels. So yeah, those are our red blood cells. So just flipping back here really quick, and I'm going to zoom out. So we have our information on plasma proteins here at the top. And then this is my information that I found important to make note of for the red blood cells. So again, I will post this so you can use this to kind of pull information from and add information to your little summary sheets at the end of class as well. All right, moving on from red blood cells to white blood cells. These ones I'm not going to spend as much time on because these are your immune system cells, and we have an entire section on the immune system where I'll get into more details. So the leukocytes are your white blood cells. And like I said, with red blood cells, if you want to call them white blood cells, that's fine. But I expect you guys to know that a leukocyte is a white blood cell, and I will not tell you what that is on a quiz or a test. Okay. There's not as many as there are red blood cells. So we still have a lot of them because they are important, but it's about a 700 to 1 ratio. So 700 red blood cells to 1 white blood cell. So quite a few less. They're a lot bigger than red blood cells, and there's a lot more of them. So these ones do have a nucleus, which means that they can undergo cell division without the bone marrow. So the bone marrow still produces the white blood cells, but then they can kind of change and differentiate depending on what they need to be used for, because all of our white blood cells have different roles that we're going to learn about later. So yeah, they're fancy. They have their nucleus. They can be modified. And because they can be modified, we have lots of different types. The two kind of general categories are the granulocytes and the agranulocytes. And then in brackets, I have the different types of those granulocytes and agranulocytes just with their actual names. So your neutrophils, your basophils, I don't like the E one. I pronounce it wrong. Sorry, every single time. Eosinophil, maybe. These ones are known as granulocytes, which means that under a microscope, they just look kind of grainy. So they have little speckles in them. The agranulocytes, like our monocytes and our lymphocytes, tend to be a little bit more smooth looking under the microscope. So that's just where those names come from. And again, they all have different roles to play in the immune system. So the main functions of our leukocytes is to protect the body and build immunity. And they accomplish this by doing two main actions. The first one is the process of phagocytosis, which is something you guys would have learned about in Science 10. This is the process where the cells can eat something. So they basically just extend their arms, they wrap it around, and then they eat it. And then we also have antibody production, which helps to flag cells as bad so that our other cells can come up and do the phagocytosis process. I'm going to flip back here for right now just to help explain this next process. So leukocytes, again, are your white blood cells. They're part of your immune system. There's lots of types, and they help to form antibodies. When we have our cells, when we look at the cells, these cells all have proteins on the outside that make them look a little wonky. Oops. Okay, these little circle things are called antigens. And these basically tell your body if these cells belong there or not. So all of our cells have proteins that are our body's antigens that our immune cells are going around looking at saying, yep, that one's fine. That's a good cell. That's supposed to be here. Everything's good. When you guys get sick, that's usually because you have a virus or a bacteria that gets into your system, and our body has recognized that these antigens do not belong. Okay, they mark it as a bad cell, And then that's going to stimulate an immune response. And again, the big thing that's going to happen is our body is going to start to attack these cells. We're also going to have these antibodies that are produced, and antibodies are these weird little proteins that can attach to these antigens. And again, they mark the cell as bad. So they say, this cell is wrong. It's not supposed to be here. Please get rid of it. Once it's marked as bad, so let's just say this guy has a little antibody sticking out of him. Okay, and he looks angry, and our little white blood cell's like, oh, hey, how's it going? The white blood cell is going to be like, oh, you have this thing on you. I'm going to give you a hug. Okay, so the white blood cell is going to extend its arms. The little microbe is going to be like, whoa, what's happening? Please stop. Okay, and then the white blood cell is literally going to just eat that little microbe until it dies. Which you guys are not able to see. 2 seconds. There we go. Okay, this process where, again, it's extending its arms and it's taking it in is called phagocytosis. Oops. And I like to call it the hug of death, because that's literally what it's doing, is it's hugging the bacteria or the virus until it dies. Okay. So these antibodies, again, are saying this cell is bad. They're also immobilizing it, so they're kind of stopping it so that these white blood cells can attack it easier. Sorry, forgot to change my screen. So antibodies immobilize the bad cell, and then the white blood cell can come and eat it. And then I forgot to write down what can go wrong with the white blood cells. I will go over a couple things tomorrow with you guys about this part. One of them, though, is leukemia, where we have the breakdown of our bone marrow, which can impact the development of these white blood cells. And then we also have HIV, which can lead to the development of AIDS. And it's important to remember that HIV and AIDS are not the same thing. And you can have HIV without developing AIDS, which, again, I will go over a little bit later. But they attack your white blood cells as well, which brings your immune system down, which is why AIDS can happen, because it's autoimmune deficiency syndrome, where your body just doesn't have an immune system anymore. All right, last thing is platelets. And these ones are my favorite. So again, I have a silly comic that's going to be coming up, and I'm sorry, but I promise it'll help you remember things. I do also have the platelet part that I'm going to be drawing on here up on the board still. I'll make sure that that doesn't get erased. So you guys can draw that part down if you want. But basically, the bone marrow is producing our platelets just like it produces everything else. But instead of forming platelets just plain as platelets, they're going to create a cell called a megakaryocyte. And then this megakaryocyte is going to break apart into the individual platelets. The platelets have two different forms. They have an inactive form when they are round, little smooth balls. And then they have an activated form, which is when they kind of look a little spiky and a little aggressive, like they do, or like they look on the screen. When they're activated, I like to think of them as burrs. So if you have animals that go outside into the fields and you're like, if you're throwing a ball for your dog and then he comes back with all these gross, nasty, sticky, spiky things all over their fur, that's kind of what a platelet's like. When they get spiky, it means they get really sticky and they're kind of like Velcro and they'll just attach to each other. And platelets, their main role is blood clotting, which is good when it's used properly. So when it's supposed to happen. And that's usually if you cut yourself or if you have an injury, we want to clot that injury so that you don't bleed to death, because that would be bad. Blood clots can also happen when they're not supposed to happen, which I will get to, and that will cause a whole host of other issues. So again, if you guys get cut, that's going to stimulate the release of these platelets, and then it's going to trigger this entire blood clotting cycle. So I'm going to flip back over here for 2 seconds, and then I will let you guys fill in the next section, because I'm going to write this down, which again, it's on the board up there if it's too hard to see on here. So the first thing that's going to happen is you are going to cut yourself, and you're going to be like, oh, I am so sad. That really, really hurts. Okay, it could be a paper cut. It could be you're making pizza and you're grating some cheese and then the cheese grater slips and then you accidentally cheese grate your finger. Okay, not speaking from experience. The first thing that's going to happen is the platelets are going to rush in. They're active, they're spiky, they're sticking together, and they're rushing to that site to try to clog the hole so that you're not bleeding too much. This is something we are going to lovingly refer to as a platelet party. And again, the comics that I have to show you will explain this. Once the platelets rush in, we are going to have a series of events that happen. And I have a couple ways to remember it, but it's just kind of something that you just have to continue to write down until you memorize it. After the platelets rush in, that is going to activate a protein called thromboplastin. Okay, thromboplastin is going to bind with calcium. And when that happens, that activates a different protein called prothrombin. Prothrombin is going to activate another protein called thrombin. And thrombin is kind of a jerk and doesn't like anybody. And I think he's like, you know, the person that you don't really want to bring to a platelet party, because he kind of brings everyone down and he's kind of aggressive and not very nice. So what thrombin does is he ends up cutting up, and not he, it ends up cutting up a fourth protein called fibrinogen, which is one of our proteins we talked about at the very beginning, one of the plasma proteins. And it's going to cut up fibrinogen into a final protein called fibrin. And fibrin is going to turn into what looks almost like a fiber. So like things that make your clothes, like a thread. And this fibrin is going to wrap itself around the platelets to form our final blood clot. So how I remember this, the throm names, so the ones that have the word throm, so THROMB, all go together. And I group them from the biggest word to the smallest word. So thromboplastin to prothrombin to thrombin. And then we move into the fiber sounding words, so fibrinogen and fibrin. And again, we start with the biggest word, which is fibrinogen, and we end with the smaller word, which is fibrin. That's the only strategy I've been able to come up with to remember those. So if you guys come up with something else, please share with me. And I'm happy to share it with other people. But this little flowchart, clotting situation that we have happening, you guys will need to know, you will need to remember, and you might just have to write it out a bunch of times to get it in your brains. So again, blood clotting is important to repair any torn blood vessels. So if you bruise yourself and you break a bunch of capillaries, there's going to be a platelet party happening in there to heal those capillary beds so that you're not bleeding to death internally. If you cut yourself externally, so if you get a cut on your skin, again, we want to clot that up so that it doesn't cause any more damage. The platelets clogging those cuts are also going to prevent microbes and bacteria from getting into the cut and causing you to get even more sick as well. Again, you cut yourself, the platelets are going to rush in, they're going to stick together, they're going to activate thromboplastin. Thromboplastin is going to wrangle in some calcium and say, hey, buddy, let's go to this awesome platelet party. They're going to then, call up their friend prothrombin and say, hey, prothrombin, the platelets are throwing the best party ever. Let's go hang out. Prothrombin's like, okay, but I need to bring along like my little brother thrombin, and thrombin again doesn't really want to go. So thrombin goes like kicking and screaming to this platelet party. And as he's kicking and screaming, he ends up bumping into fibrinogen, and poor fibrinogen just gets like shredded. Okay. Literally gets broken apart. He just wanted to go to the platelet party. He just wanted to have a good time. And he ends up getting broken up into fibrin. And then fibrin again is like, whoa, let's just zen. It's fine. It's a platelet party. It's a great time. Let's just bring everybody together, and holds the party together in the form of a blood clot. So again, if this analogy helps you to remember things, awesome. I just think it sounds more fun to say, I have a platelet party happening versus I cut myself and I'm bleeding. So it's up to you. So fibrinogen again is going to turn into fibrin, which these little yellow lines here are the little fibrin fibers that are attaching to our platelets. And then they are attaching to these red blood cells to, again, clump everything together. So the world's best comics, in my professional opinion, they are having a platelet party and they're so excited. And then we have this serious platelet over here with his mustache being like, what's going on here? And they're like, platelet party. He's like, well, I haven't had this much fun in years. And they're like, woo, platelet party. He's like, I think we're stuck. And then they're like, yeah, platelet party. And he's like, no, we are seriously stuck. So this was the first comic that I ever saw in regards to this whole platelet party situation. And I laughed way too hard. And I understand that I'm a nerd and that it's probably not as funny as I think it is, but I died. And then the Awkward Yeti illustrator, comic writer guy came out with another one, which made me laugh even harder because our little mustachioed platelet got a little bit more serious looking. So we move on to a different scenario where we have blood loss in Sector G. Platelet party. This is a serious business. It's no time for shenanigans. Plate, stop, let, no, party. And they're just like thinking it's the best time ever. And my favorite part is just how unimpressed our poor little mustache platelet looks. And in the corner, there is a little canister of fibrin that again is trying to hold the party together. So I found these helpful. I think it's great. Every time I get a cut now, I'm just like, oh, platelet party. But it will probably be like one of the things that you remember from bio. I've had lots of people come up and talk to me about it after the fact, where they're like, Marichel, I got cut, and all I could think of was these silly platelet parties. And I'm like, bio, it is a useful science. All right, so clotting is important until it's not, okay? So what can happen? That can go wrong. We can clot when we're not supposed to. And two things that can occur is a thrombus, which is a stationary clot, or an embolus, which is a moving clot. Neither of them are good. They're kind of terrible. But the seriousness of them depends on where they happen. So a thrombus is very common to form in your legs. And a lot of times people will get a blood clot in their legs if they are on a really, really long plane ride or a really, really long car ride and they haven't had the chance to get up and move around. So it's definitely recommended if you have to go on a long plane ride or you're going on a long car trip to take a break every once in a while, to stand up. If you're on a plane, walk up and down the aisle a few times. Make sure you're kind of moving your feet even when you're sitting still, just to keep that blood flow going and to prevent this blood clot from forming. If the thrombus occurs in the brain, that can again lead to a stroke. If it occurs in the heart, that can lead to a heart attack. So all of the things that we talked about before, that can happen if you have plaque buildup in your arteries. This is just when you just have blood cells that have clotted together. There are times too where a piece of the thrombus can break off, which is terrifying because it will travel to your heart usually, and then your heart will pump it to somewhere in your body. And where that clot lodges is going to cause different issues depending on where it ends up. So if it ends up in your brain, you can end up with a cerebral embolism, which can also lead to a stroke. If it happens in your heart and it goes into the coronary arteries, then you have a coronary embolism, and that can again lead to a heart attack. And then it can also end up in your lungs, known as a pulmonary embolism, which can drastically impact your breathing and potentially stop your breathing. So clotting is not great when it's happening at inconvenient times. And to finish, we have another comic. Fun fact, platelets are actually yellow. They're not actually red like red blood cells are. So this is kind of more anatomically accurate, even though it's not at all. So these platelets are just living their best life, and they're like, platelet party, it's our favorite thing. And he's like, no, a blood clot won't be necessary. There's no injury. Look at my mustache. I'm serious. And they're like, platelet party? Platelet party. He's like, no, there's no injury. Stop platelet partying. And they're like, woo, platelet party. And again, he says, I'm getting too old for this, because this is when we end up with things like heart attacks and strokes, because we're clotting when we're not supposed to be clotting. So again, I think they're great. You guys might think they're ridiculous, and that's fine. Okay. So that's components of blood. Again, it is a lot of information. I understand it's a lot of information. So for the rest of class, whatever time there's left, I want you to take this information. I again have it all on this little document here that I will share as a PDF on Google Classroom that you guys will have access to. And you can use this if you want. You guys can even I don't know if this will. I feel like it's a little bit small, but depending on how this shows up on the screen, you guys can pause this, and then you guys can use this to fill in the rest of your summary charts. You can feel free to grab another textbook from the floor to finish filling out those summary charts as well, if you would rather do that. If you finish the blood cell parts. If you want to move ahead and start filling in the blood group parts for tomorrow, you're welcome to do that. There are also some questions that will be on the front lab bench that you can work on as well. They're separated into the 3 sections. So there's blood questions, blood group questions, and immunity questions. As of today, all you guys can do is the blood group or the blood questions. So if I'm going to kind of leave it up to you guys what you would like to work on. I will also, not for today, but for tomorrow, I will print off the next set of terminology stuff for those of you that like to fill out those terminology sheets. Okay. So have a great rest of your day. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out and email me. But yeah, I will hopefully be back tomorrow and we won't have to do another video lesson, but we'll kind of see what's happening. So I hope this worked. I hope it didn't glitch too much. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. I'll see you tomorrow.